All right.
And here we go. So, welcome to the tea party of the day. If you're new to this tea party or any other party that we have here, my name is Jay Frost, and I'm happy to welcome you to the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by DonorSearch. And if you've been through these sessions before, you know what I'm about to say, which is that we won't be talking about DonorSearch today. At least I won't be, unless, of course, our guest mentions it for whatever reason. But that's not because we don't love them. We do. They have been kind enough to provide this amazing platform for conversations with leaders in philanthropy and fundraising around the world since 2016. And we've had well over 500 sessions. We're getting better counts on that today. And they've been on a variety of subjects, but all of them have been built around the kinds of interests that we hear from people like you and we'll be hearing from in the chat. So thank you, Gail, for warming up the chat right now. I want to encourage you to utilize the chat to let us know that you're here, especially to let our guest know that you are present, but also to use the Q&A if you have a burning question, anything that occurs to you throughout. That ensures that we won't miss it if there's a lot of conversation over in chat. Now, what I'd like to do before we begin, of course, is tell you how you can get this content later. So if you're interested in hearing this again or sharing it with colleagues who couldn't be here live with you, you can do all that over at donorsearch.net, which you'll find under the resources tab, all the recordings there. Many are also over on YouTube, but it's easy to find them at DonorSearch, as well as the calendar for all the events coming up. And we're already heavily scheduling the next year, in addition to this week alone, where we have 4 sessions this week. So I hope you'll join us for all of that, starting with the conversation we're about to have right now with, of course, Kerry Rock, sitting there so patiently sipping in her tea as we begin. Kerry Rock is the chief executive at Prospecting for Gold. And if you don't know the firm, I hope you will check them out afterwards today. They are the leading research outfit in Europe and based in the UK. And they have been doing this kind of work that we all love in fundraising for many years. Kerry's work individually there has been going back, I think it's 12 years. She joined the firm in 2012 first as the director of business development, and today is the chief executive. She has been working, in fact, 2018 is an interesting year when you took over that role because of so many changes in, of course, data protection, one of the issues we'll be unpacking in the next few minutes. Prior to working with her colleagues at Prospecting for Gold, she was back at her home country of Australia, where she was, oh no, that's not true. Before that, I guess, action planning as director of consulting. And then before that, also working at Potoroo Films and in research at Sydney Water. So, and of course, you may touch on those things later, but so happy to welcome you, Kerry, and thank you so much for spending time here today.
Thank you for asking me. This is great fun. Lovely thing to do on a cold evening in London.
Yes, and it is evening, so our special thanks for being willing to take part of your evening to do this. And it is cold, so how cold is it again?
Well, it's about -1 or 2 Celsius, which is, I have no idea in Fahrenheit, but it's been snowing. We don't get that much snow, but we've had snow and ice. I just went skidding down my path as I went outside before. It's very icy,
Oh,
very
wow.
exciting here.
Okay, well, that's scary. So I'm glad at least you're safe here with us.
Yeah,
And if
that's
anybody knows how to convert to Fahrenheit for the ignorant among us, please feel free to put that in the chat. So it's cold there, but it's not cold in the world of philanthropy. You have been working in a lot of hot topics for a long time, but especially, I know, the last few years. Part of our most recent conversation had to do with data protection. So maybe one place to dive in right away is what is data protection? What does it mean? And what relevance does that have to the whole discussion of philanthropy and fundraising?
right. Well, I think that Europe has a particular focus on data protection, which I think it's safe to say in the US, you are fortunate that you don't have quite the same level of intensity around it. So basically what we mean by data protection, or what we're looking at in terms of processing personal data, it's all, oh, sorry, 28.4.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah. Basically, what it means is that we're looking at the way in which we process people's personal data, and we have to do it in a way in the UK and in Europe which is extremely mindful of the rights of individuals and their rights that they have over their own personal data. And we have a thing that you may have heard of called GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and that's a European-wide regulation which the UK has kind of grandfathered in when we had the terrible thing called Brexit. And it basically provides a set of regulations that strictly govern how you can use the data of basically any given person, any way, shape, or form. So it has had a massive impact on how we use data in fundraising in the UK and elsewhere. So,
Maybe backing up a bit for those who don't know prospecting for gold, if you could give a thumbnail sketch about the work and then
yep,
maybe how data protection informed it post 2018.
yep. So prospecting for gold, we've been going for about 20, well, actually, we think it's 23, almost 24 years now, coming up 25th anniversary in a year or so. And we are an agency that specializes in things to do with major gifts, but primarily known for our prospect research. So we have a prospect research database that we use that's an information on 270,000 UK millionaires that were built up over the last 20 years. Now, by US standards, 270,000 may not sound like a lot. By UK standards, there's not too many more millionaires that we've got in the UK. So it's a database that we use for research, and we do wealth screening, and we do lots of other research that many of you might do, whether that be cold prospecting or briefings. But we also use that very much as the basis for kind of a whole range of advocacy around major gift fundraising, and that's great. We use it for work on individuals, trusts, and foundations, and everything, as you know, is all linked. So, we very much come to the research we do with that philosophy that we can be approached in different ways, but it's all about really good practice. So what happened in 2018 was that this thing called the GDPR came into force. A little bit before that, the market in the UK became tumultuous because there were a few charities that received fines from our regulator for doing something around health screening. They weren't fined for screening, they were fined for not telling people what they were doing with their data. So when the GDPR came in, it became even more important and more rigorous in terms of how you had to communicate to people data. So to a certain extent, the world froze because people were unsure what they could do or what they couldn't do and how they had to communicate this information to people. So you had a world of fear because charities were going, my goodness, we could be fined. Then you had a world of confusion because a regulation was coming in without with lots of ambiguity and confusion around that. And you have a very risk-averse sector. Charities tend to be risk-averse. So it was about how to, for us as an organization, and what I have done for the last 4 years is virtually nonstop help organizations overcome these barriers and show them that you can really do great prospect research still in a way that's incredibly respectful of your donors. And that's the key thing, being respectful of donors, and achieve fundraising objectives and research objectives. But it's about having a slightly different mindset when you approach research. And we talk about having a privacy by design approach. And it's about thinking about the privacy implications of what you do from the first moment you set out starting to think about fundraising and prospect research. So it's a big mind shift that I think we've gone through here.
It sounds like it. And something struck me about what you said as the first part of that, which is that the fines were not levied because screening was done, but because of the communication or lack of communication with with their donors. So
Yep.
how does that play into this, and how have you and charities in general addressed this issue of donor communications to put that issue about fear, about data, and what we're doing to the side?
Well, it's quite interesting because, in fact, the process you have to go through is, dare I say, very straightforward. But it has been, you're right, it's about the fear of doing it. So to do things lawfully, what you need to do is tell people what you're doing with their data. And in what we do is we have a thing called a privacy notice, and the privacy notice sets out all the things that one could possibly do with that person's data. And when you first make contact with them, when they sign up to the charity, when they go on the website, they should have access to the privacy notice. And so it's about, so the issue has been getting real clarity into privacy notices about prospect research, putting it bluntly, and understanding that having it there, people don't have to give consent to do it. They have to have the opportunity to tell you that they don't want their data processed in this way. So it's not
So
consent.
it's an opt-out rather than an opt-in.
That's right. But but opt out still, people then go, oh, well, it's consent. It's like, no, it's not. We rely on something called legitimate interest as a lawful grounds for processing. So on the basis of legitimate interest, people can tell you, please don't process my data in that way. The opt-out rates, now I'm going to use that term, is something like 0.00008%. It is
Wow.
minuscule.
That's
And this,
tiny. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I say to a charity, if you send out a privacy notice that has this in it and you have someone tell you, please don't do this, be so excited, because one, it shows they've read your privacy notice. How many people do that? And two, if the regulator ever comes asking, you can say, hey guys, look, someone opted out. Clearly our communication was good. So I take it as a sign of pride if you get an opt-out. And if any of you sign up to anything in the UK, you probably get a privacy notice sent to you. And over here, it has become, not sure who's on the call, but I'll say this, almost a bit of a joke, because every organization who might process your data sends you a privacy notice, and then they send you the updates. So in my inbox every week, I might get 10 different privacy notices. Yes. How insane is this?
Well,
So
so with messages like that, I can imagine some people might say, I don't want to receive these messages. But if they opt out, is the charity then not complying with the law?
no, because right. So you can, so another thing around how we can, so putting research aside, putting communications in the forefront, you can only do marketing communications via email or telephone with consent. So you have to have explicit, granular consent to do marketing. You can still write to people. So you can send snail mail to someone for a charitable ask, for example, a marketing ask, on the basis of legitimate interest. However, you have a duty to inform people that you're processing their data. So you can send an administrative email or a service notice via email without consent, because you have a duty to do it, but it cannot contain any marketing messages at all. And it's really quite, one of the things that was quite tricky for a lot of organizations is that they may have a newsletter, and the newsletter may have in it primarily an update on something that's not marketing. But if it had one fundraising ask in it, it became a marketing communications and therefore could only be sent with consent. So this is something that really turned the sector upside down. And a number of charities then, when this was all happening, to be risk averse, went, we will seek consent for everything we do, and we will get consent. And the numbers of supporters they had dropped by, in some cases, millions, because they couldn't communicate with them. And now gradually many organizations are going back to rely on legitimate interest for postal communications, for example, because they know actually by wiping out everyone, they've lost millions and millions of pounds in revenue. So
it sounds like some of the things that maybe we've encountered in the United States with HIPAA, because the idea, of course, is to protect the patient's right to privacy and all the data associated with it, and they own that data. And so many health-related institutions erred on the side of not wanting to send any information or do any research on anyone who passed through their doors because of that. And maybe there have been adjustments over time, but I guess that wouldn't be so much an issue in the UK, because fundraising in the health sector is not quite as robust as here. It tends to be more focused on higher education and the arts and things of that nature.
Yeah, so I mean, primarily when we look at the fundraising market here, the big markets are definitely higher education. To a certain extent, a lot of schools are getting more involved, arts definitely, and then broad charities. Now, the difference from the hospitals here, the health sector, is you've got a lot of medical research charities that are doing work, and some of those are attached to hospitals. And a lot of hospitals have a small fundraising charity, or some of them might have 20 fundraising or 30 fundraising charities. It's very confused, but they have to set up separately as a charity. And often, I mean, they might raise £200,000 or £300,000 a year. it's that, I mean, some of them are raising more, and sometimes if there's a big hospital build, they will fundraise for the additionality, because the government funding, you know, under the NHS, because we have the NHS funded health system, the government will fund the hospital, but it maybe can't get the best scanner, or it can't pay for the sensory room for the children, or all the other things that go into a hospital to make it great. So you get private philanthropy going into what we call the additionality rather than the core hospital. So that's been growing and growing over time, but it's, you know, so probably at the moment we're working with 3 or 4 different hospitals, but it's all relatively small scale compared to the amount of money that's being raised elsewhere. Yeah.
Now, one of the other big dynamics in the US has been about the focus on top donors, on top prospective donors. And I know that's an area where you all have excelled for many years to help people focus on that. But we've also seen this kind of winnowing out of the middle donor, for lack of a better phrase, and a decline in the percentage of people who are giving. Are you seeing anything that's similar to that in the UK? Like a focus on one place and less focus and less activity within another? Or?
Yeah, so I think broadly, if you look across the community, with especially what's been happening in the last couple of years, with, you know, the times we've been through, what we've noticed is, and I think we'll notice even more, is the bottom group, fewer people can afford to give. And at the top group, that group has been growing and more people are giving, but not, shall we say, the number of new donors that are coming in is definitely not at the rate we would like. There needs to be a lot more work done to encourage philanthropy, especially at the mid and high value end. And that is particularly the case because the current economic situation here is, let's just say, quite grim for many, many, many people. And so therefore, a lot of that kind of community fundraising and low-level event fundraising, which is actually a feeder for mid and then high in many cases, has been falling off. So it's a bit of a changing market. But I think one of the things that we have noticed, you know, kind of through the pandemic time, was that the people who were giving were clearly wealthier. If you want to put it that way, people were, you know, if you were wealthy, you really gave more during the pandemic. And I think we're going to continue seeing that in the UK because I think there's so much discussion around the need for philanthropic engagement that it's there, but I'm kind of giving a slightly mixed message. So I think, you know, there's a lot of wealthy people who are still giving. We need a larger proportion of the wealthy people to give. And the barrier is, how do you get more of them to give? And that's kind of where I'm trying to get to in that rambling sentence.
No. That's, well, you're unveiling a rather complicated portrait. And as you do that, I guess there are a couple of things that are very helpful to know. And one is what healthy philanthropy looks like in the UK, and then how that maybe has changed or is changing as a result of the pandemic, and now the economic circumstances. And as we talk about this, it probably would be helpful for those in the United States to know exactly what's going on in the UK. So maybe we can start there and then work our way backwards a bit, because people may not be aware of the financial situation there, the problems, particularly in the energy sector. And I don't mean profits, I mean people keeping their houses warm. Tell us a bit about what it's like living there right now.
Well, it's on many levels, it's extremely grim for a massive proportion of the population. So we have an energy crisis, energy prices. So, you know, the government has put a price cap on energy, but the price cap is something like, say, £3,000 a year for the average family who would have a year ago been paying maybe £700, something like that, £700 to £1,000.
And this is for all families, irrespective of income or wealth?
Yeah, no, and then that's the average. So for example, if you've got a big family and you use more, you pay more. They've just put like a price cap, but the cost of energy, so my personal energy bill, even with a price cap, has gone up. It's almost 3 times higher than it was 6 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, the rate of inflation in shops, so I think our current rate of inflation is about 11-12%, something like that. It's we have workers striking en masse. So every night on the news at the moment, they put up a matrix showing a chart of which groups are striking on which days, because there's such a shortfall. The level of wage growth has been so low in so many sectors. So nurses, postal workers, rail workers, airport work, I mean, you name it. But it's so amazing to see this graph every night, or a graphic of who's working and who's on strike. It's amazing.
And is that so that people will know, okay, don't take the tube today, or avoid the grocery, or is so they'll know?
Literally. Yeah, the highway maintenance workers are on strike today. That's going to be a problem on those roads. It's
Right.
like that. It's so it's feeling like this kind of very strange place to live. And I think one of the things that has really emerged is that division of wealth. There's the Office of National Statistics does some great analysis of wealth, and the bottom 10% of wealth in the UK, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, on average, those people had less than £10,000 worth of assets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's showing you that the level of wealth of the bottom group is so low, and at the top it is so much higher. So the top 10% have, say, 1.7 million on average, and the top 1% have, multi-millions. But that disparity is growing, and at the moment there is definitely more wealth going up to the top end. And
still now, even with all these conditions.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yes, the middle class, there is a middle class that is hurting more than it did before, just because the things that you used to pay a reasonable amount for are now doubling, in some cases, energy. So it's impacting that middle group. But the wealthier, putting it bluntly, the wealthy always make money in a recession. They make money in bad times. So they are making money. That hasn't changed. Not every single one will. Some businesses are going bankrupt, and and the business sector itself. So when you're thinking about philanthropy here at the moment, you are looking at different business sectors to engage with. One of the key things is, well, how dependent are they on energy, and has their energy bill gone from, there's examples that, like a restaurant that maybe spent £4,000 a year on energy is now spending £40,000 to £60,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about people's ability to invest in the things that they love, their charitable work, then it's going to be influenced by what their expenses are. So if it's an active business, it sounds like that might be more challenging than if this is a person who has sold their business and they're invested in the stock market. Is that a fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's around thinking through where people are in the life cycle of their profession or their career or their entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Because if we're thinking, we've just done some research and we're looking at the kind of hospitality sector, and we're actually, right now is not the time to go to that group, because they've just come out of all the COVID stuff, and now they're stuck with basically the energy crisis. So their profits are just being wiped if they can stay in business.
So that's the bad news. But it sounds like there's, at least for some people, and potentially for some of the charities who are talking to those people, there may be some good news in there, buried in there somewhere. So where are the opportunities for charities today?
So I think there is still all that money in the city, and the reality is that the city, and despite the fact I think London is just trying to follow Paris in terms of value of stock exchange or something, London is still the hub of finance, and there is so much money still floating around, whether that be in the property market, any of the finance, insurance market. There's so much there. And dare I say, some people who have invested in the energy sector, because the reality is the energy sector is making massive profits at the moment. And there's going to be actually opportunities coming through of people investing in green energy stuff and green activities as well. So that's going to be another booming market that I think people are starting to watch and see, who are the people who fell out of helping to change the way we do things. And the tech sector, is up and down. I mean, there's some areas that are going well, some areas that aren't going so well. But again, we spend a lot of time trying to monitor what's happening with individuals who are the ones who will break out. What we know that some are having some issues, shall we say. So, yeah, but there's always some very nice pots of money, and the changes to some of the arrangements around that sector, even more money.
So, Kerry, when you are thinking about this from the perspective of a client or a charity, and even if they can look at sectors where there might be opportunity, again, recognizing that what we're trying to talk about here is not extraction. It's to meet with donors who might care about the same things and then invite them to participate in these things and to support these things. But as they do that and they think about sectors, do you have some of the same tools that we might have in the United States in order to find that? I mean, for example, you mentioned energy, and one thing I can imagine doing is looking at people who are the insiders at energy companies which are public. That's one thing that we can do. That data is all public. What's the equivalent for you at prospecting for gold or within a charity to try and find out, well, who are the people in energy who might have some money right now, but also care about the same things we do?
Okay, that's interesting. So we can use Companies House data. So, stuff about public companies is published in Companies House, and that's freely available. You can go in and you can research anything about public companies. And about private companies, you can understand who the shareholders are and who the key players are, but you can't necessarily get all the finance about them because if they're private. But so there's a lot of information that's out there through the Companies House service around financial data. And then basically, we still do old-fashioned things like, read the Financial Times and the other press, looking for, which of the companies giving out their bonuses at what time, who's getting the money out of those things. So there's lots of old-fashioned research that we still do to identify where those, who are the people making public listings and things like that. So all of that stuff is definitely available. The difference is that when you are doing research in the UK, you are limited to using information that's in the public domain, and often the way people define that is information that's in the public domain and not behind the paywall. That makes sense. That you have to get.
So an example of that, what's like with the Times, they have the big rich list, but that might be behind the paywall. How do you?
So some charities wouldn't even look at that because it's behind the paywall, even though you can do it for £1 as a subscription. Most would probably say it's public enough in the newspaper that it's okay. Companies House is fine because you can get it all free of charge. But, you can't necessarily just buy lists of things. We used to, for example, get some investment lists and things, but we know people won't use that now because and it is back to what's in the data protection regulation around the use of publicly available information. So it put into the public domain, in a sense, for people to use and to use it freely. So you can get house price data, for example, but you would want to, like, we have a thing called the land registry, and you can download massive amounts of data from the land registry. But you can do that free. You have to have the resource to handle the data set. You can pay for small reports that they do for you, but it is available free, so you can kind of use it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, but it gets to another question, which I guess, even if you know where the data is, you have to have somebody inside who can mine it. It's not just the tech; it's also the technical proficiency. So now, if they rely on a firm like yours, they're going to get a good deal of that, but you don't only work for one client. So what kind of internal capacity do organizations have to do the kind of work we've been talking about once they've identified what they need to do and what's legally appropriate to do?
Yeah, so it really varies from, and I'll take the higher education sector as an example. In the UK, you still have some universities that have a kind of development office that might be one or two people, and that's the whole fund. Yeah.
For a university.
Yeah. Where you have some that are at the other end that have massive development teams that are
Oxford, something like that.
That's right. Or Kings and things like that. So they vary greatly, but we still have a lot of very small shops, as you would call them. And across the whole range of arts organizations, charity sectors, some might have a big team of prospect researchers in-house might be 3 or 4. That would be an enormous team of prospect researchers in the UK. Yeah.
And what about budgets for that kind of work?
Budgets tend to be quite tight. So a lot of organizations, the number of organizations that have the ability to subscribe to things like BoardX or Fame or those things that you might use quite readily, is quite small. You might have 20, 30 organizations in the UK that might subscribe to something like that, because what is it, 10 to 30,000 pounds, that's, yeah, things are quite tight.
So I wonder, is that under resourcing? Is that because the money just isn't there, or because they're cautious about spending the money? It's sort of like what you talked about before with data protection. Is the issue that they can't access the data, or because they're reluctant to do it in a way that, of course, requires thoughtfulness and a consistent and legal approach and an ethical approach, but it's a matter of commitment. So how much is the getting you 10,000 pounds into your research budget a matter of willingness, and how much is a matter of possibility?
I think it's a matter of it's not being, unless you're one of the big institutions, it's just not the way things have been done. It's kind of you you are deemed to be quite lucky if you have access to those resources. And I think it's partly, if you think about the scale of fundraising that's happening, and the scale of fundraising that happens in the US and the scale that happens here, we're doing it on a smaller scale. And so even fundraising targets are probably relatively smaller for many organizations. So it's not probably deemed as investment worthy. I mean, just even investing in prospect researchers, because we have a model that we use. If we're running training with people around kind of the basics of setting up a prospect research program, and how many, we have a model that says, if this is how many prospects, take your table of gifts, unpack it, look at how many prospects you need that are, hot, warm, cold, freezing. Look at all of that, and how many researchers might you need to support the activity that's required to get that prospect pool up and running and run your campaign. The number that comes out, if we say you need 5 researchers, if someone gets 1, they'll be quite lucky on the whole.
So that kind of outside pressure must be very useful, actually, for not just these research shops within institutions, but for the sector as a whole. So that puts quite a bit of pressure on a firm like yours, because on one hand, of course, you're there just to do the work and for people who have already committed to doing it. But it sounds like there's a certain element of advocacy, because I would think if the client had some internal research capacity, they had a budget, it doesn't just make it possible to work with you and to pay for you, but also means they're going to actually put into practice the work that they've gotten from you. So how much of the work that you do is really a matter of getting people to rise to a higher level and go out there and engage with donors and invest in internal capacity for this kind of philanthropy?
Quite a lot. And I think a lot of the work I do, the things like some of the webinars and training that I run is around almost giving people the confidence to go and talk to the team and say, we actually can achieve more if we have this resource behind us. And we've been doing that from day one when we started Andrew Thomas, who set up Prospecting for Gold, he has been doing that since day one, saying, actually, researchers, you need a stronger voice to advocate for what can be achieved with really good research. And that's, so I would say, front and center of our philosophy is doing that, and then doing it one-on-one with organizations as well. And it's showing people, I think one of the things we try to demonstrate is really how much more money you can raise when you've got good research behind you. And, any of the work we do, we pitch it as, if fundraising campaigns fail usually because of lack of prospects, that's it. So this is your problem. If you want your campaign to succeed, you're going to have to invest in your research. And once you've had that conversation and you show people the numbers, actually the investment does often happen. But it does take a mindset change, because people will give lip service to, oh yes, we need some prospects, but it's only when you show them the numbers and show the impact that having those prospects will have that you can actually get somewhere.
I know that one of the issues, not just in the US and potentially the UK, but around the world, has been even if there's a method of finding people who might care about the same things we do and have resources to give to them, that also means that they have to go out and pick up the phone and visit them in person, or virtually, of course, is an element of that. And people haven't always been willing to do that. And in fact, it seems like technology has simultaneously allowed us to have more conversations like this one.
Yeah.
So thankfully we've got that. But it also means that for many in development or organizations that don't have much of a development shop, that it's a way to say, well, we can just send an email.
Yeah.
That we don't have to sit down with people.
Yeah.
Is there a bit of that there, or is there has been here?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is, so one of the things we do is wealth screening. So what we'll do is give people some wealth screening reports and they'll go away. And then we say, well, so what have you been doing? And then the worst example is 12 months later, oh no, we haven't spoken to anyone. We just thought we should do some more research on them first. Now, that's just heartbreaking. And one of the questions people always say is, well, what's the return going to be on this? And I said, if you use these results and go and speak to a few people, the return will be amazing. You don't have to speak to everyone, you'll prioritize them. As soon as you engage those people, you will get a return on your investment. There is no doubt about it, whether it's wealth screening, whether it's cold prospecting, whether it's briefings, because as soon as you start having conversations, you are going to get to the point where you're going to make an ask and you're going to get your returns. And I can give lots of good case studies of organizations, and some of them not very big, but who, for example, do regular screening, and maybe it's every year. For us, that's quite regular. And they take those people, and then 2 months later, they hold their first event and they invite them all. And then they start asking. And within 3 months of the screening, they've got 50, 60,000 pounds in from the first couple of people. And then they've got 100,000 a few months later, and on it goes. And so and using those examples and reinforcing to people this, a screening or research won't bring you any money. It's only by talking to people. It shows you who you need to speak to, and sometimes it shows you what you need to speak to them about, but it doesn't take away the fact that you've got to speak to them. And I think one of the great things that happened through the pandemic was the move to online made it easier to reach people. So what we found here, and I don't know if you found the same, is that a lot of donors who normally you maybe could never get to speak to because there were so many gatekeepers, they were gone. It was, oh, I can talk to you tomorrow. Let's set up a Zoom call. And it happened. And that's why that made leaps and bounds into the efficiency of how fundraising was happening at the major gift level, and leaps and bounds forward in terms of some of the gifts that were coming in, because it was instantaneous, it was flexible, it was action oriented, and you spoke to people. So
that begs another question. We saw in the United States a lot of concern at the beginning of the pandemic, certainly, and then in the midst of it, we're still dealing with it.
Yeah.
But especially in the middle, that people were concerned a lot of nonprofits would fail, that people wouldn't give, and some of that, there have been difficulties, but some of it has not proven to be true. That, as you say, there are different ways of engaging with people if we're willing to do it.
Yep.
So what have you seen in terms of the landscape of philanthropy in the UK, and maybe even more broadly, over the last 2 years? Are things up? Are they down? Are different people responding? Are the same people responding with less or with more? What has changed for the donors in the midst of all this?
So what happened initially for donors was that they changed their priorities quite quickly. So when pandemic hit, certain organizations were just like, you're off my agenda. Anything that is immediately related to pandemic, whether that be welfare for hospital staff, whether that be food banks and things like that, because welfare issues, because a lot of people lost income, that whole thing has changed. So I think some charitable sectors did really, really well. And I think now what's coming through and that was for about 12 months that it really, if you like, distorted the landscape. And not for a lot of organizations, they actually also took a step back and said, there's no point, let's engage, but don't make the same asks that we would make, because we know our ask isn't as strong as it would be normally. So they actually made a conscious decision. There were quite a few organizations that ran like emergency appeals, especially some of the arts organizations that were incredibly successful, because they were like, we have to shut our venue, no one's got any money. And the supporters just poured in money. They were really, really successful. But I think what's happened now is that people are, shall we say, they've learned that people are understanding, for example, medical research a bit better than they did before. So you can probably make some more interesting asks now that, look at what happened to achieve change through vaccines. Actually, why don't you come with us on our journey? And still the welfare elements, especially again because of the economic situation here, the food banks and the homelessness and all those things, I think are still high on the agenda as well.
That's what I was going to ask, is can that be maintained? And I know it's a bit of asking you to do prediction, which is not the same as looking at what's happened. But do you get a sense that organizations, especially this time of year, which is this the big giving season for you as it is for us this year?
Yeah, people make their pre-Christmas gifts and things like that a lot, but it varies. You also get, so there's a lot of giving, but there's also another patch kind of around spring when you start to get a lot of events and things happening, and then you kind of have that, and then you have the autumn winter event season as well, where you get lots of stuff happening. We talk a lot about this, and we've been having some internal discussions around where we think giving is going to go. And our sense is that for the next 12 to 24 months, the people who can afford to give are going to continue to give. And we don't yet think that the number of people who can afford to give, at high levels, shall we say, the people who, if we put them in the philanthropy category, we think that on the whole, there's still going to, the philanthropy market is going to hold up. That's our sense of what's going to happen. We could be really wrong, but our sense is that the philanthropy market will probably hold up. The low-end fundraising market, the community fundraising, all that is going to really, 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 really struggle. And so the philanthropy market has to do even better than it did before to make up for the lack of income coming through some of the other fundraising channels for organizations. So if you were relying on people doing sponsored runs and things like that, they're not going to raise as much. But if you can make some big asks, you'll probably get your money.
What about chugging? Now, and can you define, first of all, explain what that is for those who may not know, because it's not the same here. We get a little bit of it, but not a lot.
Okay, yeah. So and I think that's changed here because, again, pandemic, because we were off the streets so much. But chugging is when you have representatives from charities or paid people from agencies often who are standing in the street, and as you walk down the road, they come running up to you and say, "Have you heard of Oxfam? Can I speak to you today about crisis? Can I speak to you?" And it's something that is, let's just say, lots of people have a very negative view of it because it's seen as being quite confrontational. The public is, "Oh, I'm being chased by another charity worker down the road." But basically, it's about getting people to sign up to low-level gifts. And I think, because for a long time we couldn't do any of that. And then gradually different organizations have started. They started with door-to-door again, like going door. I don't know if you have door-to-door in the same way.
Not very much at all. Yeah, we have a lot of it in political canvassing, but no.
Yeah. So we still have, people knock on, they'll go through the neighborhood, knocking on the door, trying to get some charity signups. It doesn't happen as much as it used to. And I have to say, it's not an area I've ever engaged with professionally. So I don't know a great deal about it. But I think the reality is that, one, with COVID, no one was going to go near a chugger anyway if we're in the street, because we're all kind of, don't come near me. And I'm actually trying to think, have I even seen one? I did. Someone approached me the other day in London. I think I've had 2 people approach me. And normally, probably, if I was walking down the street, I would have had a few more. So I think it's gone down, but there's definitely been an impact on, shall we say, cold recruitment in that way, and right. I think that's going to continue. So if we talk about cold recruitment at the low-level recruitment level, I think that's really challenging.
So this fight to get people to be a part of our world, whether it's by on the street chasing them down, or sending out email solicitation for acquisition. I don't know how much of that is even being done there.
Not allowed to. Yep.
mail appeals, all the different things people do, invitations to events, as you said, in the spring and the fall. These are all different things we've done. How do you imagine that that organizations in the UK are going to address this shortfall in the middle?
Yeah, I think that there's going to have to be a model developed around I'll say mid-level events to get people involved a bit more, possibly at that level to bring them in. Because I think you do need that kind of face-to-face engagement to get people a bit more committed to the cause. So I think there is going to have to be something there that increases the personal, to increase the personal commitment. Exactly how that's done, I think, is challenging. I think that it's only just, I would say the last few months is the first time you could say feels like we're back to normal in terms of the numbers of people turning up to kind of the higher value events or those types of events. I mean, really quite recent. And I'm a trustee of a charity, and the numbers we had coming at events that were, say, you meant to have 400 city people, you'd have 200 turning up. The numbers were that low. And it's just feeling like it's finally turning the corner when people are saying yes and actually turning up en masse. So I think there's going to have to be a reinforcement of that type of thing, because I think and some online events are probably still going to continue, not at the same level as they did, but I think online one-to-one more than online events will be really, really important.
There are a couple of things you mentioned online that made me think of this. A couple of things that we haven't discussed, and I wonder if that's because they're less important now or they just haven't come up in our conversation, but they're usually paired. One is about social media, and the other one is about generational differences.
Yeah.
So are those two things just not a focus of our attention in this conversation or in the general philanthropy conversation, or are they just being melded in? Sort of like social media is just another form of media. I mean, are generational differences more the invention of marketers, or are they real? What is your thought as you think about what's next in terms of things?
I think they're very real, actually. It's a real thing. And so we are being asked more and more in the research we do to identify younger potential donors who are maybe can give it relatively low but major gift level to start the philanthropic journey with an organization and maybe hope they'll stay with them for 10 to 20 years. Let's start the relationship now. And one of the ways of trying to find some of those people is via social media. So it's actually looking for who are the key social media voices for them, and also for charities using key people to engage a broader audience and see how you can bring some of those people in. A lot of the research we do is around, just broadly, I'll say, diversifying supported bases at the philanthropic end, because there's been there's a real history in the UK of kind of, if you're looking for a charity donor at a high level, you went to a white middle class man, and that's who you ask for your money. And if you look at charity databases, that's kind of what you see. So actually, one of the things, we've had a lot of projects, like we had one where we were looking for the AME women to become trustees of a particular arts organization. We've done lots of things where we're just looking at particular communities and diaspora communities as well to engage them more in issues, looking more women, and definitely looking for younger people. And so looking for younger people, I mean, we had a funny project recently where we were looking, it was for people to support a young offenders program. I'm thinking, so one of our researchers' sons, so who are the key people in the grime music, who are the people running, who are the gamers and all that type of thing. So we were suddenly mining a scene of people that, as a whole lot of women of a certain age, we didn't know much about, but we were tapping into our team's children to find out who it is we should be researching. And I thought that was really interesting for us. It was kind of an eye-opener, and then we could go. But so that's exactly something that we're doing a lot, but we're having to get help doing it because, it's not our world, but we're working on it. It's quite fun, actually.
I was going to ask you if there are any big surprises that have happened in especially the last couple of years, but maybe that's one of them, is that the platforms themselves are more attractive to some people than to others. Twitch is an example of this, where it seems to be an unknown for many people over the age of 40. I'm generalizing, but people under 30, it would be shock if somebody didn't know what Twitch was. So it's that kind of world, and the same for e-gaming and esports, which is a huge industry, but unknown to people over 50.
And it's something we're thinking of is, we say, people of influence in the UK, the influential, and it's kind of, and I'm a foreigner to the UK, I'm Australian, so I kind of look at this from a slightly different way, but, the influential, the great and the good. There's a lot of talk about the great and the good, get the great and the good on board. And now what we're saying is, no, who are the influencers? Who are those young influencers who are out there getting big followings? And it's a different term, of different group of influencers. You know, we have the traditional influencers, now we've got the new influencers, and some of those have money, but some of them can get you to people who've got money. And that's what we've got to find that balance. And but it's a different world. It's quite fun.
Sounds like it. I know one thing I have to ask, even though no one's asked it here today. I'm sure they want to know, and people want to know when they watch this video later, is if someone is thinking about internationalizing their fundraising program and they want to look at the UK, they want to talk to donors there, prospective donors there, or across Europe or Australia. You're familiar with that environment too. Are there 2 or 3 things that you always suggest to people that they do as they're thinking about that, whether it's through research or just general, fundraising preparation to make that outreach?
You know, the first question is, why should anyone outside of your territory support you? You know, so if you've got a really good answer to that question, then it's worth pursuing. So we have done research for quite a few US organizations who have got genuinely, like British constituents, and maybe there's some of the arts organizations where there's a lot of people from the UK who go and attend venues, or some of the universities who've got that kind of thing. So if you genuinely got a good constituency base to go to, it's well worth doing, I think. And then it's really, have you got something niche enough that people are going to be excited about? And if you've got that, it's one of those things, what's your case to take out? And if you haven't got the case to take out, don't bother taking it out. Because the British, for example, will see the US market is so big. You've got so many people there who can give to you. Why are you asking us? We're little. So it's about understanding that mindset. We do more work here of, a lot of people think, oh, we should be able to get money out of the US. And it's exactly the same thing. Really? Why should they give to a British charity? Why should they give to a British university? So that's really important. And then the other thing is just, if you are going to start doing some research around the UK and Europe, be mindful of some of these data protection pitfalls. I hate to raise it again, and it can be the most boring topic in the world, but it's just something that is so different in the way we have to do it. And you have to think those things through, because you can just get yourself a little bit tangled up in knots, and you've got to be careful not to stay on the right side of the law, I think is the easiest way of saying it.
So what's the best recommendation you have you might have material at Prospecting for Gold about this. I don't know if you have pieces that you've published or things like that. How do you recommend that people could become more informed about that issue before they give any consideration to anything cross-border, and also maybe how they can learn more about your work and be in touch with you?
Okay. On our website, we do have a briefing, it's a 3 or 4 page briefing note, which is called, I think, Data Protection for Prospect Research, something like that. So you can download that, and it gives you that kind of overview of some of the things to think about if you're prospecting in the UK. And that's quite a useful starting point. If you are in the higher education sector, there's an organization called CASE, which many of you may have heard of. CASE UK has also produced some guidance, which is really quite useful. Basically, again, I think it's called Prospect Data Protection for Wealth Screening and Prospect Research, or something like that, which has been produced as closely as you can say in consultation with the regulator as is possible. I did have some input to that, but that's a very good introduction to what some of the things you might need to think about. So they're kind of 2 starting points that are worth kind of reasonably, I think, sensible starting points. There's also the Chartered Institute of Fundraising in the UK, which has a whole lot of guides to fundraising in the UK, but a lot of them, they're really built for UK practitioners, put it that way. And in terms of us, if anyone wants so firstly, if any of you do have just some questions about UK stuff, feel free to get in touch with me, because I'm always happy to answer questions and just have a chat to you. That's really absolutely fine. And I won't be chasing you down saying, you've got to do some work with us. It'll be, no, I'm really happy to talk to you and find out what you're doing. And it's always good, I'll learn from you, you'll learn from me. So feel free to reach out and drop me an email. There's our website is there. It's about to be rebuilt. It's a little dodgy at the moment, but any day, any month now, we'll have a new one, which will be a bit more user friendly. And we also have a monthly newsletter that comes out that you can sign up for as well, and that gives a few insights as to some of the things that might be happening in the UK as well.
And would you mind just sharing where that URL is so that people can find?
Yep. So I can put. Do you want me to pop it on the chat? Would that
Sure,
be?
but if you'd say it as well for those who get the recording.
Yep. So it's prospectingforgold.co.uk. Yep. So quite
Perfect.
straightforward. Yep. Oh, that's where we
And
are.
you do a lot of training, so I'm sure that that'll be also mentioned there, or people can follow you. I don't know where people follow you, but I know that.
Yeah. We've got a presence on Twitter and LinkedIn, and and I run 1 or 2 free 45-minute to 1-hour webinars a month on various aspects of prospect research, major gift fundraising, and things like that. And there's a back catalogue that I can share with people. And when we get our new website, it'll all be downloadable from the website.
Well, I'll look forward to that. But in the meantime, thank you so much for all of this, Kerry. Really do appreciate it. And sharing a window on everything that's going on over there. I don't know how much we're going to find of what you're encountering is going to come here, but we're certainly feeling some of the symptoms of it anyway, in terms of everything from inflation to dealing with our own philanthropic issues. So I'm sure we have a lot we can continue to learn from one another. We have a lot to learn from you. So thank you for all this today. Really appreciate it.
It was lovely talking to you. Thank you very much.
Great talking with you. And my thanks to those of you who were live. If you're watching this recording afterwards, hope you enjoyed that too. And I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the sessions both this week, but also throughout the coming year. We have, again, 3 more sessions this week. And then we have probably in the neighborhood of about 70 programs coming next year at least. So to learn all about that, you can by just going to DonorSearch.net. Our friends there are all about your donors, but they're also all about providing a platform for education like this for reasons that it's hard to explain, except that they're generous folks. So you can learn all about that under the resources tab. And while you're there, if you care about your donors, and I hope you do, I hope you'll check out everything they have to offer. They can provide some pretty startling insights about the people who love the same things that you do. And go and check out Prospecting for Gold if you're thinking about the donors abroad, because they have a unique view there as well. So until next time, maybe tomorrow, take care and stay healthy. We'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you. See you.